We are officially a few weeks into the NFL season, and like with every NFL season, some players and teams have started off on both the right and wrong foot. Players like Daniel Jones and Puka Nacua have started off exactly how they wanted to, and through 3 games, each player is playing well. But not every player and team has started off like Daniel Jones and Puka Nacua. And for better or worse, there's been a lot of surprises through the first few weeks of the 2025 NFL season, including Daniel Jones. I don't think anybody would have believed you if you would have said the Colts would be 2 games ahead of the Chiefs and Ravens through 3 weeks of the season, and that the Texans would be 0-3. Now, as we have discussed on the channel countless times, the NFL season is a marathon and not a sprint, but in today's video, we are going to break down the biggest surprises of the NFL season so far. And for clarity, this is not a ranking of surprises, but we are going to break down several situations around the league. Now let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans are 0-3 through 3 games, and the biggest surprise for them is how disappointing they've been through 3 games. Now, I will say heading into the season that I had a lot of concerns with this roster, specifically with the offensive line and the run game, but I'd be lying if I said I thought they'd be 0-3, especially with the defense allowing just 51 points in the first 3 games. And I think there's 2 extremely frustrating aspects of the 2025 Texans so far. The 0-3 part, of course, but it's also the combination of how good the defense has looked with how bad the offense has looked. And it is also very unfortunate for a player like Ariante Ursary, a second-round rookie offensive tackle from Minnesota, to play the Rams and Jags in 2 of the first 3 games in his career, meaning great pass rushes like the Rams and Jags both have. For reference, he allowed 5 pressures in both of those games. The run game has also been disappointing as the Texans cannot run the ball consistently, and Nick Chubb has 141 rushing yards on 34 carries in 3 games, with 25 yards coming on 1 carry alone, meaning he's averaging just 3.5 yards, excluding 1 outlier of a run. CJ Stroud has also been disappointing, and I think there is a conversation to be had about what the future of the Texans looks like. Their defense is really good, and it shows every week, and I go back to the Texans defense allowing 51 total points in the first 3 games, yet having an 0-3 record. And no matter how you slice it, if your defense plays that good consistently, there's bigger problems if you're still winless. I do think the Texans win in Week 4 over the Titans, but their upcoming schedule is difficult as they go to Baltimore, then go to Seattle, and then come home to play San Francisco. And we could very easily be looking at a 1-4 or even 1-5 start for Houston. Now, positively, Quentin Johnston has been a huge surprise for the Chargers so far. QJ had a rough start to his career as he had just 431 receiving yards in his rookie season back in 2023, and it was a very tough time for Quentin and the Chargers during this time period because the start to his career was slow. And while he did finish his rookie year with over 400 receiving yards, there was a point in his rookie year where there were conversations about him being one of the bigger draft busts in the past couple of years. I mean, through 11 games of his rookie season, he had just 21 receptions for 190 yards and 1 touchdown, and unfortunately within this, he had the big drop against Green Bay with less than 2 minutes to play to really add insult to injury. But through 3 games in 2025, Quentin Johnston is averaging 17.1 yards per reception and has 3 receiving touchdowns in 3 games, which is more than the 2 he had during his entire rookie year. And even during his second season, he had the big game against Cleveland in which he had a very long touchdown, but through the first 17 weeks of the year, he had just 525 receiving yards before erupting in Week 18 for a 13 reception, 186-yard performance against the Raiders. And in 3 games in 2025, he's had 70 yards or more in every game and is playing at a much higher level. And the Chargers receiving trio of him, Ladd McConkey, and Keenan Allen are playing well to start the 2025 season. NFL teams talk about building a receiving room similar to a basketball team where you have different shapes and sizes, and the Chargers have certainly done that, and for a player in Quentin Johnston who was doubted and counted out countless times throughout the first 2 years of his career, well, simply put, I'm really happy to see the success he is having in the early parts of the 2025 season. And today's video is sponsored by PrizePicks and my sign-up code GFB. Week 3 was entertaining from start to finish, and I think Week 4 will be too, and I have my pick'ems for this weekend with the season-long partner of the channel, PrizePicks. And with my Week 4 lineup, I like Bijan Robinson more than 26.5 receiving yards, as he's had 5 targets or more in each of the first 3 games, and I do believe in some ways he's Michael Penix's safety blanket, and I expect the targets to continue. I also like Caleb Williams more than 1.5 passing touchdowns, and he had 4 passing touchdowns against the Cowboys last week, and while their secondary isn't very good, I don't think the Raiders secondary is very good either, and I do like Caleb Williams more than 1.5 passing touchdowns. I also think the Jets are going to try and establish the run against the Dolphins defense, and because of this, I like Breece Hall more than 54.5 rushing yards. And of course, the half-yard special of the week, Jalen Hurts to throw for more than 1 yard against the Buccaneers. So use my code GFB when you download the PrizePicks app, link below, and when you make your first $5 deposit, PrizePicks will give you $50 in lineups instantly. We are closing in on the goal of 100 signups by the end of the month of September, so when you download the PrizePicks app, use code GFB, and when you make your first $5 deposit, PrizePicks will give you $50 in lineups instantly. And a big thank you to PrizePicks for sponsoring today's video. The next big surprise so far in the early parts of the 2025 season is just how stark of a difference there is in the 2024 receiving class. Usually whenever 3 or 4 receivers are drafted in the first round or even the top 40 selections, there's usually at least one player that is significantly worse than the others at the NFL level. It happens, and there's a reason that the old saying is a third of first round picks are busts, a third are average, and a third are stars. And I know we extended the first round to top 40 within that example, but you get the point. But within the 2024 receiving class, Marvin Harrison Jr., Brian Thomas Jr., and Xavier Legette were all first-round picks, and Marvin Harrison Jr. has not had a great start to the 2025 season, though I think he will eventually turn it around, and there is a chance that he has a good game against Seattle on Thursday Night Football in Week 4. For transparency, I am recording this before that game, but Brian Thomas and Xavier Legette have not had good starts to the 2025 season, to say the least. Brian Thomas Jr. was a player who had nearly 1,300 yards and double-digit touchdowns last year, and one thing that I thought should have been noted heading into the 2025 season more than it was discussed nationally was a lot of BTJ's production came with Mac Jones as his quarterback last year. He had his final 4 games where he had 3 100-yard games, with the lowest total yardage that he had was 90, and Mac Jones was the starter for all of them. So I'm not really surprised for Brian Thomas Jr. specifically to have a dip in production in the early parts of the 25 season, but with Xavier Legette, maybe this is kind of a hot take or a very loud take, if you will, but I'm at the point with him where I'd be very surprised if it works out in Carolina, and I don't think it's a coincidence that a former first-round pick just a year ago, not a former first-round pick from 10 years ago, has 4 receptions for 8 yards in 2 games in the 2025 season. I mean, you almost have to try to have that little production, and even when he's been on the field, there's been a lack of work ethic and a lack of concentration, and I also don't say that lightly, because there was one play specifically where he very easily could have dragged his foot in on one of the couple of targets that he has so far in the 2025 season, and then there was also a 2-minute warning clip where everybody else was up to the line of scrimmage and they were waiting on Xavier Legette, who was kind of, for lack of better wording, lollygagging around and not paying attention to the situation and kind of having a careless attitude towards it. So with all of these players in Harrison Jr., Brian Thomas Jr., and Legette, it's kind of a stark contrast to see players like Malik Nabers and Ladd McConkey have the years that they've had to start the 2025 season, and obviously the careers to this point too, because usually it is only one bad player to have a kind of poor start to their career rather than multiple, or at least their start to the second season, and that is one of the biggest surprises that we've seen in the early parts of the 2025 season. And I also wanted to include Rome Odunze as well, who's had a really good start to the 2025 season, but when you go back and look at the class before this, the 4 receivers that were selected in a row, and Jackson Smith-Njigba, Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers, and Jordan Addison, 3 of the 4 were really good in their second season, and Quentin Johnston was kind of the oddball out, though shout out to Quentin Johnston for having the start to the year that he's had so far in 2025, but it's kind of the point of where it's usually one oddball out, and it's such a contrast within the 2024 class where it seems like right now everybody is either boom in a big way or bust in a big way, and we'll see how this transpires over the course of the 25 season. I do think Brian Thomas Jr. is too talented of a player to not continuously get the football, but I do think that that is a surprise worth noting a couple of weeks in. Now, another big surprise a couple of weeks in is just how bad the Dolphins have been so far, and while I wasn't high on the Dolphins entering the 2025 season, I would have never thought that this is how their season would go a couple of weeks in. I didn't think that they'd be 0-3 with this type of performance, and with the players only meeting after week 1 with seemingly all the signs pointing to Chris Greer on his way out the door, Mike McDaniel on his way out the door, and of course Tua on his way out the door. And that's definitely a surprise relative to the expectations they had, because I know some Dolphins fans thought that there was a possibility that they could compete with Buffalo to win the division, and I thought they played well in Buffalo in week 3 on Thursday night, but it was a division opponent on a short week, so in some ways I also wasn't surprised to see the Dolphins play well on Thursday night, or at least keep it competitive. But the strengths of this team have really been nowhere to see in some aspects, as well as the defensive line has been pretty disappointing. And if there was one saving grace for the Dolphins defense in 2025, it was going to be the pass rush led by Zach Sealer, Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips, and of course last year's first round pick Chop Robinson, yet they've pretty much all been largely underwhelming. So I hope the best for the Dolphins in the future, but unfortunately in a lot of ways I do think their 2025 season is over just a couple of weeks in, because I don't think they're going to make up 3+ games in the division, and even if they were to somehow, some way get a wild card spot, well, I don't think anybody legitimately thinks that the Dolphins would be able to win 3 straight road playoff games. So unfortunately, for all the wrong reasons, the Dolphins make today's video. Now, one team or one unit that has played their tails off to start the 2025 season is the Browns defense. Unfortunately, the one black eye in the Browns defense a couple of weeks in is the fact they allowed 41 points to the Ravens in week 2, but that was not solely on the Browns defense with how that game was played. Yes, Baltimore had 41 points, but Baltimore had 4 drives start in Cleveland territory, one of which was on the Browns' 5-yard line, and one of which was on the Browns' 24-yard line. And when you're put in those situations as defense, well, there's not a lot you can do. But the Browns defense held Lamar Jackson to just 13 rushing yards, and they held Derrick Henry to just 23 rushing yards on 11 carries within this week 2 game. And most recently, of course, they held the Packers to 10 points and upset Green Bay with a 13-10 win. Cleveland has allowed just 172 rushing yards in the first 3 games of the year, and not surprisingly, they're first in rushing yards allowed through 3 weeks, and they're also first in average yards per carry against, as they're allowing just 2.3 yards per attempt. Now, I thought the Browns defense would be above average this year, but I didn't think they would be this good this early. Myles Garrett is, of course, Myles Garrett, and there was a clip against Green Bay in which he basically glided on an inside move, and the left tackle had no answer, and the mic'd up clip was of him screaming to Jordan Love to run because Myles Garrett was closing in. But rookie Mason Graham also had a really good game against Green Bay, and linebacker Carson Schlesinger has also played well in the first few weeks of the year too. And between Graham and Schlesinger and Harold Fannin and both running backs, well, I tweeted this earlier this week, but their 2025 draft class looks to be a good foundation for the future, and good for them because despite being 1-2 through 3 games, there's a lot of positive things to take away for this team. The 49ers defense has also been really good through the first couple of games, and one of the biggest reasons I want to specifically highlight the 49ers defense is because of how bad they were at times last year. San Francisco had a lot going on last year, both on and off the field, but they finished 29th in points allowed as well as 20th in turnovers forced, as they forced just 17 in all of 2024. I thought it was a tremendous upgrade for them to bring back Robert Saleh, and through 3 games, the run defense has improved in a big way too, which was one of the biggest things I wanted to see from the 49ers this year. And I don't think it's a coincidence the Seahawks had as much trouble moving the football against San Francisco back in week 1 compared to how they've played in each of the past few weeks. Now, unfortunately, Nick Bosa is out for the year with a torn ACL, and given the caliber of player Nick Bosa is, that will inevitably affect the 49ers defense over the remainder of the 2025 season, and that was also one of the reasons I wanted to include San Francisco in today's video, which was to give them flowers before I think things inevitably change. And that's no shot at anybody in the 49ers current roster, it's just a testament to how good of a player a healthy Nick Bosa is. I mean, in the first game of the 2025 season, when it was by every definition hell or high water, what did he do? Well, he bowled back the Seahawks right tackle Abraham Lucas, who was coming off of a fresh contract extension, bowled him right into Sam Darnold, forced a fumble, and won San Francisco the game. Whatever you think of Nick Bosa is something else entirely, but from a football standpoint, he is a game wrecker. And what happens with the rest of the 49ers season is to be determined, but I was really impressed with how this team rebounded from a tough 2024 season in the first couple of weeks in 2025. Next up is the Detroit Lions offense looking this good this fast. After the Week 1 game against Green Bay, in which Detroit lost 27-13, there were a lot of loud takes on the internet. There were a lot of "I told you so," Ben Johnson made this offense, Jared Goff is going to go back to being a bad quarterback without Ben Johnson and Sean McVay and all of this, and Dan Campbell is a big coordinator merchant. And it also didn't help the fact for those people that the Lions were down 27-6 for a lot of the fourth quarter, and they scored a touchdown with a minute to play in garbage time. So they were also taking victory laps based on that Green Bay smoked them and that the Lions' best years were behind them. But the Lions, in typical Dan Campbell fashion, responded with 90 points in the following 2 weeks. They put up 52 points on the Bears, in which Jared Goff was the NFC Offensive Player of the Week in Week 2, and then they put up 38 points against the Ravens at M&T Bank in Week 3. And that was a big win for the Lions because the Ravens absolutely smoked them a couple of years ago, and the Lions got their revenge a couple of years later. It was a highlight reel of highlight reels. David Montgomery had 150 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Amon-Ra St. Brown had a great night as well, and there was a clip of Amon-Ra St. Brown after he scored a touchdown that went viral for something he said, and I'm not going to say what he said, but it was a good night for the Lions, all things considered. There was also David Montgomery crashing Aiden Hutchinson's press conference, which was a very cool moment for the city of Detroit and their fan base.
What'd you make of the performance of your teammate, David Montgomery?
And the whole take here is that the Lions being this good this fast, to me, is kind of a surprise. Not that I doubted the Lions, but I didn't think they would be this good already. Now, heading into the season, I did say that the Lions would, in theory, regress, and I think even Lions fans thought that they would, regress as well, because they won 15 games last year, and they had a top 15 offense ever in terms of points. So, going back-to-back 15-win seasons and having back-to-back top 15 offenses ever was always going to be a tall task, but I'd be lying if I said I thought they were going to put up 90 total points in Week 2 and Week 3. So credit Detroit, credit John Morton, who, by the way, took a lot of unnecessary slander after a single game, after 4 quarters of football. People were ready to write him off, and I credit John Morton for doing this. I credit Dan Campbell and, of course, the Lions players for making all the plays, and they are, without a doubt, a team that could very easily go to the Super Bowl a couple of weeks into the season if they keep up the level of play that they've played at over the past couple of weeks. What better story has there been through the first couple of weeks of the year than Daniel Jones and the Indianapolis Colts? They're calling him Indiana Jones. I mean, Daniel Jones is a legitimate MVP candidate through the first couple of weeks of the season at this point in time. The Colts have had 3 games. They put up 33 points, they put up 29 points, and most recently they put up 41 points. And after the Dolphins game in Week 1, there was a couple of great throws from Daniel Jones. I think back specifically to a hole shot that he threw down the left sideline. I thought that was a tremendous throw by Daniel Jones, but again, it was against the Dolphins, a team that was not good heading into the season and a team that I thought was going to miss the playoffs. So it was a good start, and I wanted to see more in Week 2 against the Denver Broncos, and we certainly saw more against the Denver Broncos as the Colts put up nearly 500 yards of offense, and most recently against the Titans, we saw it again as the Colts put up 41 points on the road. And I do want to give a big shout out to Michael Pittman, who said post-game that we saw in pregame warm-ups with how sluggish they were, that they didn't want anything to do with it, and that we were going to go out there and win the game. And whenever you can say that about a division rival, knowing heading into the game that you are going to kick their rear end, that is a definitive change based on where the Colts were last year at times and based on where they were now. And a couple of Colts fans, rightfully so, they said, hey, we want the Daniel Jones apology video. We want you to admit how wrong you were. Look, I'm not going to make a 20-minute video about Daniel Jones specifically, but what I will say is how wrong I was based on everything that I said heading into the season. And there was a specific play against the Titans early in the game. It was 3rd and 3. Indy at this point was up 7-3 because of a Kenny Moore pick 6 that was on the Titans' first drive of the game. And at this point, Josh Downs was running a post route where the point of what he was trying to do was try to go back out to try to bait the safety, and he did a tremendous job of cutting on the route. And within this play, Daniel Jones is throwing this from far hash, and he has Arden Key running directly in his face. And at this point, Daniel Jones just has to throw this up and hope that Josh Downs runned under it, which Josh Downs successfully did. And while you kind of may just say, okay, big deal, Daniel Jones threw the ball under pressure and he made a big play, so what? Why I like this play specifically specifically is Daniel Jones, whenever he was under pressure, having a 250-pound man sprinting directly at him, ready to take his head off, knew that he had to bend Josh Downs back towards the line of scrimmage, if you will, so that the safety couldn't come over and kind of just reach over him and make the interception. So for Daniel Jones to kind of like banana peel this route for Josh Downs was a tremendously high IQ play and a high IQ situation to be able to realize, hey, I have a guy running directly at me, but where do I need to throw this football to where it's Josh Downs' ball, who clearly created separation on the break part of the route so that the safety can't come over and, recover from the loss that he had within the play so that he can make a play on the ball. Well, that was a very good play by Daniel Jones, and that's a lot of what we've seen through the first couple of weeks from Indianapolis. I could not be happier for Daniel Jones. I couldn't be happier for Shane Steichen, who was definitely on the hot seat a couple of weeks ago, and I guess you could say he's still on the hot seat if they collapse, but look, we're not having that conversation because the Indianapolis Colts are 3-0, and at this point, if they keep at the level that they are going to win the division by multiple games based on what we've seen in the first couple of weeks. I couldn't be happier for them, and Jonathan Taylor is also a legitimate offensive player of the year candidate at this point, and the Colts right now are one of the most feel-good stories in the NFL, and I hope we continue to see what they've accomplished through the first couple of weeks over the course of a 17-game season. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe as we're trying to get 215,000 subscribers by the end of the month of September, and I cannot thank you guys enough for the support. Thank you to Prize Picks for sponsoring today's video, and if that's not for you, I understand, but if it is, please always play responsibly, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.